She was not supposed to wake up. That was the plan. That was what they had counted on. That was what they had quietly toasted to in late-night phone calls while the woman they both claimed to love was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. She was not supposed to wake up. But she did. And on the morning of her own burial, while her husband stood in the next room laughing at something her younger sister whispered into his ear, while her children sat around a table being pressured to sign documents that would strip them of everything their mother had spent her whole life protecting, the door opened. And she walked in. The people who put her in that bed were not strangers. They were the two people she trusted most in this world. Margaret Ellison was 53 years old. The eldest daughter of Franklin Beaumont, a quiet man who spent 40 years building a commercial real estate portfolio across Harris County. By the time he died at 78, he had accumulated assets worth close to $4 million. Margaret received 60%. Her younger sister, Denise, received 40%. Franklin had not made that decision carelessly. Margaret was the one who had worked alongside him since she was a teenager, sat in his office after school, driven him to appointments when his knees gave out, held his hand during the last year of his life. Denise had taken a different path. Franklin loved her. But he knew who had shown up. Denise accepted her share in public with grace. Something shifted in her eyes the day that Will was read. Something that her smile could not quite cover. And it never fully went away. Margaret had been married to Dennis Ellison for 22 years. Tall, well-presented, warm handshake. Their church liked him. Their neighbors liked him. Dennis Ellison was very good at being liked. But Dennis had always had a complicated relationship with money that was not his. When Franklin's inheritance came, Dennis expected more access. More control. But Margaret had already updated her will. Everything she owned, every property, every dollar, would go to her 3 children. Marcus, 23. Simone, 19. Jordan, 15. Dennis was not in that will in any significant way. He smiled when she told him. He said all the right things. That night, he called Denise. He had already buried Margaret in his mind. He just needed help making it real. Margaret had been hypertensive for nearly a decade. Her cardiologist had explained it plainly, in a joint appointment 2 years earlier, with Dennis sitting in the room. With her specific type of hypertension, pseudoephedrine could cause a sudden catastrophic spike in blood pressure. It could trigger a hemorrhagic stroke. It could kill her. Dennis had sat in that appointment, nodded, asked clarifying questions, and thanked the doctor. Denise knew too. Margaret had told her herself. She had even sent Denise a list of her medications once, just in case of emergency, just so someone outside the house would know. That list became the blueprint for her own destruction. On a Tuesday evening in April, Margaret drank a cup of herbal tea her husband had made while she rested on the couch. She thanked him. She said it tasted a little different. He told her he had tried a new brand. She drank it anyway. Because he was her husband. Because she trusted him. By midnight, she was on the floor. By the time the ambulance came, she was unresponsive. By the time they reached Houston Methodist Hospital, she was in a coma. The lead nurse on Margaret's ward was Claudette Merrow. 61 years old. 27 years at Houston Methodist. The kind of woman who had learned to read people the way other people read weather. Claudette noticed Dennis early. The shortness of his visits. The way he sometimes spoke about his wife in past tense, small slips, easy to explain away, but Claudette did not explain them away. He asked the right questions. He held Margaret's hand in the right way. But he never stayed long. And when he left, his phone was always busy. He acted like a man waiting for news, not praying for it. On the 5th day, Dennis called the hospital and asked to speak to the attending physician. Not Claudette. Not the front desk. The attending physician directly. He said he wanted to understand the realistic timeline. He said he was trying to plan. He said the uncertainty was hard on the family. Dr. Sable Witten took the call. She told him these things could not be rushed. She kept her voice even. When she hung up, she sat very still for a moment. Then she called Claudette. But it was not Dennis who gave them away first. It was Denise. On the 9th day, a hospital cleaner named Ruthie Mae Washington was working the afternoon shift on the 3rd floor. 64 years old. 19 years at Houston Methodist. Silver locks. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. The kind of person that hospital hallways swallow whole, present, quiet, invisible to anyone who did not think to look. She was mopping the corridor just outside the family waiting room when she heard a voice around the corner near the window alcove. A woman's voice. And she was laughing. Ruthie Mae did not stop mopping. She moved her mop. Slow and steady. And she listened. The woman was on the phone. Her voice was low, but not low enough. She said things were going according to plan. She said she had been so worried Margaret would wake up before the end of the week. She said Dennis was already making calls about the life insurance. She said once they could get Margaret declared, everything would move fast. And then she said the thing that made Ruthie Mae's mop hand go still. She said the tea had worked better than they expected. Then she laughed again and said, "My sister never did know when to stop trusting people." Ruthie Mae waited until the woman had walked away. She looked around the corner. She saw the back of a woman in a cream blouse heading toward the elevator. She had seen that woman before, sitting at the bedside in room 312, pressing her comatose sister's hand to her cheek, crying. Ruthie Mae stood in that corridor for a long moment. Mop dripping on the floor. Then she walked to the nurse's station and asked to speak to whoever was in charge of the patient in room 312. Claudette Merrow looked up from her desk. And Ruthie Mae told her everything. Claudette did not panic. She thanked Ruthie Mae, asked her to write down exactly what she heard, told her not to speak to anyone else. Then she called Dr. Witten. Dr. Witten listened without interrupting. When Claudette finished, there was a silence. Then, order a full tox screen. Everything. Bring it directly to me. The results came back the next morning. Pseudoephedrine. Present at levels that should not have been there given Margaret's known medical history. Dr. Witten thought about her career. She thought about what it would cost her to step into the middle of something like this. Then she thought about the woman in room 312 who had come into this hospital with no idea that the people she trusted most had put her here. She made her decision. She contacted Adult Protective Services. She moved Margaret to a different room under a modified record designation, used in rare cases of suspected patient endangerment, that would make it significantly harder for unauthorized family members to access her location or receive updates. Then she sat at Margaret's bedside that night and said, to a woman who could not yet hear her, "You are safe. Nobody is going to hurt you in here." On the 14th day, Margaret Ellison opened her eyes. No dramatic gasp. No movie moment. Claudette was checking vitals on a quiet Thursday morning when she looked up and found two brown eyes looking back at her. Unfocused at first. Confused. The eyes of someone surfacing from a very long and very dark depth. Claudette put her hand over Margaret's hand. "You're in the hospital. You're safe. My name is Claudette. I have been taking care of you." Margaret's lips moved. Nothing came out. But her hand tightened around Claudette's. When Dr. Witten determined Margaret was stable enough to be spoken to, she came and sat beside her. She did not rush. She told her what Ruthie Mae had heard. She told her about the pseudoephedrine. She told her that her husband and her sister did not know she was awake. Margaret listened to all of it without speaking. Her face was still. The only thing that moved was her eyes. And as Dr. Witten spoke, something happened in those eyes that Claudette, watching from the doorway, would remember for the rest of her life. It was not just pain. It was the particular devastation of a woman realizing that the love she had trusted most completely had been the weapon used against her. When Dr. Whitten finished, Margaret turned her face toward the window. She wept. Not loudly. Quietly, the way people cry when the grief is too large for noise. After a long time, she turned back. Her eyes were swollen. But something in her expression had settled. My children. Are they safe? Dr. Whitten said yes. Margaret nodded. Then tell me what we are going to do. Officially, Margaret Ellison remained in a coma. That was what the records reflected. That was what the family was told. Dennis called twice in those weeks. Both times he asked about the prognosis. Both times Dr. Whitten gave him measured non-answers. He did not push hard. He was not, it seemed, in any hurry to receive good news. On the second call, he asked one more question before hanging up. He asked whether the hospital had a timeline for how long they typically maintained life support before families were advised to consider next steps. Dr. Whitten told him she would follow up with the care team. She set down the phone and did not move for a full minute. Denise came once in person. She was turned away at the ward, a standard restriction, she was told, for patient protection during a sensitive recovery phase. She complained briefly at the front desk. Then she left. But before she reached the elevator, she stopped, turned back, and asked the desk nurse one question. She asked whether the hospital would be contacting the family if there was any change at all, even a small one. The nurse said yes, of course. Denise nodded slowly. Then she got in the elevator. Claudette, watching from the corridor, filed that away too. Dr. Whitten called Marcus privately. When he walked through that door and saw his mother sitting up in that bed, alive, looking back at him, he crossed the room in 2 steps and held her. He cried the way grown men cry when they have been trying very hard not to for weeks. Mama. That was all he said. I'm here, she said. I'm here, baby. Simone and Jordan were brought in separately. Jordan, barely 15, sobbed so hard he could not stand. Simone held her mother's face in both hands and kept saying, I knew it. I knew something was wrong. They held the secret with a discipline that would have made their grandfather proud. A family law attorney named Renley Marsh came twice, built something solid and airtight around everything Margaret and her children were owed. APS and law enforcement were quietly briefed. Ruth May's formal statement was on file. Everything was in place. Then Dennis called Dr. Whitten a third time. His voice was gentle and perfectly sorrowful. He said the family had been talking. He said they were considering, out of respect for Margaret and for closure, proceeding with arrangements. He asked about the process for a formal declaration. Dr. Whitten went directly to Margaret's room. She told her what Dennis had said. Margaret looked at her. When? They will move quickly once we confirm. Margaret said, then let them. She was not asking for more time. She was not asking for protection. She was asking for the moment. The death was announced on a Wednesday. Dennis received the call at home. He was quiet on the phone, asked a few respectful questions, thanked the doctor. He hung up. Within 20 minutes, he had called Denise. The arrangements were made in 4 days. A funeral home on the west side of Houston. A closed casket, Dennis's request. A small service, family only, Saturday morning at 10. Dennis wore a charcoal grey suit. He accepted condolences with the appropriate expression. He dabbed at his eyes once with a folded handkerchief. Denise stood beside him for most of the morning. There was a moment, noticed by more than one person in that room, when Dennis leaned toward Denise and said something close to her ear. She covered her mouth with her hand and turned slightly away. Her shoulders shook. He was not comforting her. Jordan, sitting in the front row, watched this from beneath lowered eyes. He pressed his hands flat on his knees and breathed. After the service, the group moved to a side room. Dennis had brought documents, estate transition papers. His attorney, Gary, sat to one side with a briefcase and the practiced invisible expression of someone paid to be in rooms where difficult things happen. The documents, if signed, would transfer primary estate authority to Dennis. He explained them gently. He called it responsible planning. He said it was simply to ensure the children would be taken care of. Marcus read the papers slowly. He asked a question about a specific clause. He put the papers back on the table. I need to read this again. Dennis said, of course. No rush. Then he looked at his watch. Marcus asked another question. A detailed one. Gary began to answer. Dennis interrupted with a softer version. Marcus said he didn't quite follow. He asked Gary to start over. From the beginning. Dennis's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. He checked his watch again. Jordan stared at the table and pressed his hands flat on his knees. The door opened. Nobody looked up at first. People enter rooms. Gary paused mid-sentence. Dennis glanced toward the door with the mild irritation of a man whose presentation had been interrupted. And then the room stopped. Margaret Ellison stood in the doorway. She was thinner. She held a cane in her left hand. Her hair was natural, close to her head. She wore a deep burgundy dress. Claudette had helped her choose it. Claudette had said, when you walk into that room, you walk in looking like yourself. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room, and the room looked back at her in complete and total silence. Jordan saw her first. He was on his feet before he understood he was standing. Mama. The word came out of him like something broken open. He was across the room in seconds, and Margaret caught him with her right arm and held him and closed her eyes. Simone stood. Her chair scraped the floor. Both hands went to her mouth. Marcus did not move. He sat very still with his hand on the documents and watched his mother hold his youngest brother. His expression did not break. But his eyes were full. Dennis Ellison stood at the head of that table with a face the color of old ash. Denise stood 2 feet from him and did not breathe. The only sound in the room was Jordan crying. Everything else was silence. Margaret held her son for a long moment. Then she straightened. She stepped fully into the room. She looked at her children, each of them, with a look that said everything that needed to be said between a mother and her children. Then she looked at the documents on the table. Then she looked at Dennis. She took her time. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She looked at Denise. Denise took a step backward. Her heel hit the baseboard of the wall. Margaret looked at them both for a long time. The silence in that room was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. When she finally spoke, her voice was slow and even. Every word deliberate. Not a single one wasted. You buried me too early. She let that sit. Then, I heard you laughing. She let that sit too. Then she turned to her children. We are leaving. Marcus stood and took the documents from the table. He looked at Dennis one time, a long, direct look that said everything he had chosen not to say. Then he walked to his mother's side. Simone came to her other side. Jordan had not let go of her arm. They walked out of that room together. Margaret did not look back. She had already decided she was done looking back. Dennis was arrested 6 weeks later. The tox results, Rutha May's statement, the phone records, and Renlee Marsh's legal work had built a case prosecutors found more than compelling. He was charged with aggravated assault causing serious bodily harm and conspiracy to commit fraud. He maintained his innocence as long as he could. He did not maintain it forever. Denise was charged as well. The phone call she had made in that hospital corridor, laughing, certain no one was listening, was the thread that unraveled everything. The estate remained intact. Margaret's will stood. Ruthie Mae Washington received a commendation from the hospital. She accepted it with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She said it was nothing. She said she had just been doing her job. Margaret moved into a smaller house in the 3rd ward. She planted a garden. She attended physical therapy 3 days a week. She was not entirely the woman she had been before. She was not trying to be. Marcus came every Sunday. Simone called every morning. Jordan spent weekends whenever school allowed. They did not talk about Dennis. They did not talk about Denise at all. They had agreed, quietly, to step over that wreckage and keep walking. One evening in November, Margaret sat in her garden as the Houston sky went orange at the edges. Tea beside her, made by her own hands, from a brand she had chosen, in a kitchen where she trusted everything. She had been given time she was not supposed to have. She intended to use every last day of it. The people who save us are not always the ones we expect. Sometimes they are the quiet ones in the corridor. The ones everyone steps around without looking down. Ruthie Mae Washington had mopped those floors 10,000 times. And on the day it mattered, she was invisible enough to hear the truth, and brave enough to do something about it. See the people around you. Really see them. And if someone in your life has already shown you who they are, believe them. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to walk out of the room. Strength does not always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like a woman in a burgundy dress, walking through a door with a cane in her left hand, not a single word wasted on people who buried her before she was gone. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone today. Drop your city and country in the comments, we read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Take care of yourselves. And take care of each other.